The fact is, we do know that Russia tried to meddle in our election. It didn't make a difference, but nevertheless, this is another country trying to meddle in another country's election process. We all know that Russia is trying to meddle with democracies.
Even Republicans like House Speaker Paul Ryan can admit that's what's been so hard for President Trump to acknowledge, that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. According to the Russian version of what happened in the closed-door meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin today, the president accepted Putin's denial of any involvement in the election, prompting Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to tweet, quote, "Giving equal credence to the U.S. intelligence community's findings and Putin's assertion is a grave dereliction of duty and will only encourage Russia." As to what else came out of the hours-long meeting, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the two countries agreed to set up a, quote, working-level group to explore cyber issues and election non-interference. Joining me now is Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California. And Congresswoman, I guess, first your response to this idea of a working group between the U.S. Russia to explore election interference or cybersecurity.
Well, you know, I hope that the American people won't fall for that kind of putting together of some kind of commission to deal with, hacking. And that's what, they're describing. As a matter of fact, I think Americans should be very, very concerned that this president sat down with Putin, who we know hacked into our election system, to the DNC, and to many of the states that are now coming forward with this information, and to sit down with him and not have a real discussion, a real conversation, and delve into our real concerns about this happening and get a commitment from Putin that they would never do it again. Americans want to hear that kind of conversation. Obviously, this president went into the room. He brought it up because he had to. There was so much pressure leaving, America from the media and everybody else. He could not afford to go into that room and not pretend that he was dealing with the issue. But he really didn't deal with it. He took it up first. It was dismissed, and Tillerson said it was intractable. Now let's move on. And this thing about a commission and also about, what they're going to do with Syria and having some kind of cessation of the war there. Well, I don't know if Putin is in a position to absolutely negotiate and make all the decisions for Syria. Not that I care about Assad, but I would assume that he would have something to say about it. So I think we're getting played. We're getting played by our president, and certainly we're getting played by Putin. I don't like the idea that our president, again, would go into a room without any note takers, without any staff, without others who should be in the room who really understand foreign policy and who really understand Putin, and come out of it, saying how honored he is, to meet with him, and how, in fact, they're going to start working together. This is all about lifting those sanctions. And of course, Tillerson was in the room because that's at the top of his agenda, to lift those sanctions so that they can drill into the Arctic. So you have Trump, who's agreeing to lifting the sanctions, and Tillerson with the foreign minister of Russia, of course, who is supporting whatever Mr. Putin wants to do and whatever his country wants. And so that's what this is all about.
The previous guest we had, Jonathan Sanders, just saying that he expected those sanctions to be lifted in 6 months. I want to ask you about a very strange thing that happened right before the meeting. Out of nowhere, the president issuing this statement. Everyone here is talking about why John Podesta refused to give the DNC server to the FBI and CIA. Disgraceful. Now, there's a number of errors there. John Podesta didn't have control of that server. He wasn't at the DNC. The CIA never requested it. Nevertheless, John Podesta called into Hardball to respond. I want to play that for you and get your reaction.
All right, thank you.
I don't know what he's talking about. I had nothing to do with the DNC. I was the chair of the Clinton campaign. I was certainly never asked by the FBI, and I don't know anything about what the DNC did, but they've said they fully cooperated with the request that the FBI made. So this guy is unhinged, and I think he's under so much pressure from this Russian investigation that when he's in the corner, all he does is he strikes back, and he doesn't care about whether anything is true or not true.
What did you make of that statement from the president?
Well, he doesn't know the difference between what Podesta's role was with Clinton and with the DNC. He really doesn't get all of that. In addition to that, what he thought he was setting up was this proof that we have no proof. And that's what Putin has said, and that's what he continues to say. It's almost in your face. Well, you can say what you want, but you don't have any proof. And I think this president, Trump, was playing into that and trying to say, well, you know, they had proof if they wanted to share it, but they wouldn't let us see it, so they must not have any proof. I think that's what it's all about. And he thought when he did that he was nailing Podesta, because Podesta had control of the DNC and the server at the DNC. So we can just dismiss that as another Trump not knowing what he's talking about, not knowing what he's doing, and trying to give some cover to Putin. That's what that's all about. Again, people, we must keep our eye on these sanctions. First of all, the United States Senate has passed legislation, very strong legislation on sanctions. We must support that, because Putin didn't just want Trump elected because he didn't like Hillary. It is because he knew that Trump would be a part of helping to lift those sanctions. And I call the Kremlin clan, all of those allies of the president who will benefit from it, who have indicated their connections to Russia and to Putin and to the oligarchs. And so they're trying to play us. But we should not buy into anything that we have heard happened, because we don't really know, and he does not want us to know. He wants us to be in this position where we're trying to figure out what they said, and we can't be sure what they really talked about. But it's not substantive, and we got to keep our eye on sanctions.
All eyes are going to be on sanctions, I think, Congressman. I agree with you there. Thank you for joining me tonight.
You're welcome.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.